fact, we will never enjoy true success until we learn to see the big picture. Hi, I'm Steve Diggs. This is The Big Picture. Welcome aboard. Homepage today, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to overcome some of the conflict that we have in our relationships. We all have conflict, whether it's in our marriages or with our children, at work, at church, with our social groups. We all have conflict. Now here's the question. How are we going to deal with it? Well, most people don't. Most people just let things go on and on and on, and relationships deteriorate, things get worse, and good things turn into bad things. So how do we deal with our conflict to go forward in a productive way? I'm going to make a suggestion. I'm going to suggest that in order to deal with conflict, top of the list, we need to simply kill what I call the 3 deadly P's: pride, prejudice, and preference. A lot of the conflict we deal with is because we're so prideful we won't consider somebody else's position. Some of it is because we have a preference and we're selfish and we don't want to explore someone else's preference. And thirdly, it's because of prejudice. We have prejudged notions on how things have to be, and we're not going to equivocate at all on these things. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should change our basic message, but we need to be open to the concept and the idea and the possibility of changing our methodology so we can be more productive in all of our relationships. So, how do we do this? I'm going to share with you what I call the 7 golden keys to dealing with conflict. Top of the list, number 1 is this. We need to understand that when there's a conflict that is beginning, sometimes it's wise to simply ask for a timeout. Say something like, hey, John, I appreciate your thoughts here, but before we spend more time right now and get a little bit hot and heated on this, why don't we take a couple of hours and get a few other things done? I'll meet you at your office, or you can meet me at my office at, say, 1:30, and we'll talk further. Would that be okay? This is sometimes the very best thing to do because it simply slows that process down and takes some of the emotion and some of the heat out of it. Remember, we want to have more light and less heat in all relationships. Second thing is simply this. We need to understand that we should never, ever, ever ask incendiary questions like, what's your problem? That's not the way to discuss a conflict situation. Instead, we need to ask kind, open-ended questions like, can you help me understand how you feel about this? And by the way, remember that it's very important to understand how the person feels. Most of us work based more on our feelings, especially in moments of passion and maybe anger than we do from our cognitive side. So don't ask how they think, ask how they feel about things. This will help a whole lot more. Once they've told you how they feel, then simply rephrase, reframe, and restate the things that they've already said to you. Like, for instance, did I hear you, John, correctly to say thus and thus? And if he says, yes, you did, then good news. We're beginning to head to a point where we're kind of coming together on some things, and we're resolving some of this already. Number 5, remember to only deal with one issue at a time. You know, the tendency sometimes when we get into a heated situation is to dredge up stuff from the past. This is almost always counterproductive. Don't do that. We're dealing with one topic and that's it. Don't go off into the weeds on other things. Stay focused and stay on that one topic. Number 6, be aware of your presence. I call this your physicality. In other words, if you're a big, tall person, kind of like I am, and you're talking to someone that's 5 inches tall, then don't stand up in front of them and look down at them. Instead, let's get seated so we can look at each other across the table from one another. And that's another thing. You might want to think about sort of parroting what you see from the other person. If that other person, for instance, crosses their legs or leans on the table, you might do the same thing. Why? Well, subconsciously, you're doing the same thing they are. They may not really realize it, but people tend to be more familiar with other people that are like them. And if you do the same thing they're doing, they're going to tend to be more relaxed and more comfortable in the situation. It is a kind, thoughtful way to treat the other person. And number 7, last thing, is to remember that inappropriate name calling and bad behavior never has a place. Referring to the other side as those people, that kind of thing is always going to be counterintuitive. It's going to be counterproductive, and it's not going to work for us. So, simply put, if you want to have less conflict in your life, do what some experts suggest. have more of it. Go ahead and deal with the problem when it comes around. Learn to enjoy conflict. Learn to enjoy figuring solutions and resolutions to conflict. You know, one thing is true, a problem that is ignored very likely will be a problem that will grow even worse. So here's the big question. How do you want to cut the dog's tail off? Now listen, before we go any further here, this is simply an illustration. I love dogs probably better than almost anybody on the planet. Don't ever cut off a dog's tail. But in this metaphor, if you're going to have to cut off the dog's tail, there are essentially two ways to do it. One way, the dog's going to yell one time. And the other way, that dog's going to yell over and over and over again. One way to do it is to cut this whole tail off, whack, at one time. And like I said, have that poor dog yell once. The other way is to whack off that tail 1 inch at a time and have that poor dog yelling over and over and over and over again. My recommendation, get her done. Listen, in the words of the great 20th century philosopher, Barney Fife, nip it in the bud. Get it over with, get it done, put it behind you, and learn to enjoy life going forward. I'm Steve Diggs. This has been The Big Picture. Catch you next time.